Hi there. My name is Lewis Sutherland. I teach at Liberty University in the School of Divinity, and sometimes I get invited to speak at conferences. And what I like to do is when I get back from the conference, if it's not recorded, I will record my talk and put them on long form content, like YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, hi. And or on my website. And also for every conference, I write an academic paper. That is not necessarily how I talk, so I don't read the paper out loud. But if you're interested in stuff like that or the sources or anything like that, then you can find them. If you're on YouTube, you'll see it in the either the comment section or the description. So with that, I want to talk to you about the Tyndale conference. It's held in the UK every year, and it's one of my absolute favorite conferences. It's a bunch of philosophers sitting around philosophizing. It's not a word, I just made it up. And we talk about things like metaphysics and the ontological problem and the teleological problem and all of these wonderful things. I just sit around and soak it up like a sponge. But sometimes I get invited to speak about things that interest me. And one of the things that interests me right now is empathy and the attack on empathy that I've seen across social media. So the topic of my talk for this one is empathy as Imago Dei. And I start in a very weird place for a philosophy paper because usually we start with a problem or an argument or debate. But I want to talk about the sentence that is being taught and preached right now in churches and podcasts and across social media world. That sentence is empathy is a sin. Let that sit for a second. Not pride, not greed, not genocide, not child trafficking, not hurting people, not lies. Empathy is a sin. A pastor named Josh McPherson said this on a podcast last year, and NPR reported it in March of 2025. Empathy, he says, quote, almost needs to be struck from the Christian vocabulary. And he goes on, empathy is dangerous. Empathy is toxic. Empathy will align you with hell, unquote. Notice what is missing from that sentence. He doesn't say disordered empathy or empathy untethered from the truth. He just says empathy, the thing itself, toxic, dangerous, hell aligned. There are more careful versions out there, and these are the ones that we actually have to contend with. One of them comes from Joe Rigney and his book called The Sin of Empathy. Another is Toxic Empathy by Ali Beth Stuckey. Empathy, according to Joe Rigney, is not a virtue, it's a danger. It dissolves your convictions and set your steps on a wrong path. It hands a lever to anyone who wants to steer you through your own compassion. Rigney himself is a scholar and a seminary professor. And according to our friend Joe, the faithful leader is the one who refuses to be drawn in, the one who leads at a distance, who keeps suffering at arm's length. This started as a far-right reformed, and I use that in quotes because not reformed like I define it, but reformed as they do, reformed opinion in podcast and also in meme culture. And they refer to themselves as the theobros, and I refer to them as that too because they name themselves. Many wear the Jerusalem Crusader cross and exclaim Deus Vult, a historical cry to war against Muslims, and it's now revised as a badge of militant, masculine Christian nationalism. But these are senior pastors and academics and seminary professors and actual founders of seminaries and publishers. So their voices did not stay in the dark corners of the internet. I've seen books and mantras in the hands of people that I know. I've seen it promoted on social media. And now Rigney is even a London platform by the outgoing president of the Southern Baptist Convention. For those who don't know, the SBC is the largest Christian denomination in the US with more than 12 million members. That's a lot of reach. Rigney writes, quote, a community in the grip of empathy winds up being characterized by three traits: cowardice, indifference, and cruelty, unquote. His claim is that compassion ends in cruelty. You see, it's in seminary where empathy was named and taught flatly as a sin, and then it was pushed out to the pulpits and the masses, and now it's found its way into politics where compassion itself was recoded as partisan softness. It's something to be disciplined out of you. In the wider media, the suspicion grows broader still until tenderness itself starts kind of feeling a little embarrassing. Then there's the gendered version where empathy gets filed under feminine. It's a womanly weakness that supposedly erodes a man's backbone. An entire chapter is devoted to this gendered expression in Joe's book, and the thread is woven throughout it. But I'm not going to address this today, simply because it is, at its best, ancillary to our purposes here. The paradox I really want you to feel before I bring in any single philosopher to weigh in on this topic is that the very same people making this argument will tell you that human beings bear the image of God. They are right about that. And still, they have started attacking the one capacity by which you recognize another human being as a person at all. It's an anthropology of the image, and it has turned on the act of actually seeing the image in another person. So let's untie this knot. My thesis is, as plainly as I can put it, the case against empathy is not a defense of moral clarity, but a failure of philosophical anthropology. It is a mistake about what a human being is. And I'm going to make the case with 4 philosophical witnesses: Edith Stein, Emmanuel Levinas, Augustine, and Bonhoeffer. Read through them, empathy turns out to be the opposite of what the critics actually think. It's not a fusion, not a loss of yourself inside someone else. It's a grace capacity to perceive the other person as genuinely, irreducibly other. Understood that way, empathy doesn't dissolve the line between two people. It actually needs that line, and it guards that line. It's the effective and perceptual posture of the Imago Dei, and that's what it already asks of us. And guess where it takes its perfect shape? In the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Because here's the real trouble with the war on empathy. It isn't that it's harsh, even though it is. It's that it's incoherent. It tries to defend the image of God by attacking the very faculty the image works through. So maybe you're asking, why is the argument land so hard? Why does it feel right to so many people? It's resting on 2 assumptions that almost no one says out loud, and that means nobody puts a check on it. The first is mechanistic. It treats empathy as if it were a virus. It's like feeling jumps from one person into another, and the moment it lands on you, it overwrites your judgment. To feel with someone is to get swept downstream by them. The second is voluntarist. It puts the whole of moral agency inside the will, the sovereign deciding will. And that's what turns feeling into a threat. Feeling becomes the thing the will has to master or lock out in order to stay clear-headed. There's a long history underneath both of these. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's an old faculty psychology that cuts perception and feeling off from reason. And it's a stoic distrust of the passions that the church has every so often dressed up as holiness. Although, and I do love this detail, even the Stoics were more generous than their modern descendants calling empathy a sin. They kept room for something called eupathei, or good rational feelings. So modern day anti-empathy theology is actually stricter than the Stoics it's borrowing from. When you stack the mechanistic and voluntarist assumption on top of each other, empathy does start to look like exactly what they're afraid of, a hijacking of self. But the whole thing rests on a confusion. And I think it's German that makes this visible where English keeps it hidden. And there are 2 different words used in German philosophy here. One's called Einfühlung. It means feeling one with. That is the fusion. That's the space between 2 people where it collapses and you are just gone, dissolved into your feelings and one another. Then there's Einfühlung. There is no S in this word. This is the one where empathy is proper. It's the disciplined perception of another person as another person. And here's what the critics do every single time. They describe the first one, the fusion, the drowning, and then they pin the word empathy onto it and put it on trial. But when you name the switch between the 2, the whole case falls apart because it never was about empathy. It was about its counterfeit. Brene Brown is a PhD and one of my favorites. She's a trained social worker and research professor who's dedicated her entire life to studying vulnerability, shame, and courage. She's brilliant. She gave us one of the most famous images of empathy that we have with a TED Talk that has more than 15 million views, probably more than that today. She says, imagine someone stuck down in a hole in the pitch of darkness. And empathy, she says, is the one who climbs down the ladder, sits beside the person, and says, hey, I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. But her critics have a comeback, and honestly, it's something that we have to consider. If you climb down into the pit, they say, now they're just simply two people stuck in the pit. Jump in with the drowning man, and you get two drownings, not a rescue. So here's what I say, don't climb in. Keep your footing and grab a rope. Both things can be true at once, but we don't like sitting in that gray area, that nuance, do we? Watch what's happening in that little standoff. Both sides are assuming that empathy means climbing in and going under. Brown calls it connection. The critics call it a death sentence. But that drowning, that going under, that is Einfühlung. That's the counterfeit. Drowning was never empathy in the first place. Real empathy, Einfühlung, is the woman who acknowledges the other where she is and makes a way out. Maybe it is with a rope or a ladder. And you have to look closely what this woman is actually doing. First, she has to see precisely what it's like at the bottom of the pit. She has to know what it's like down there, or she tossed a sandwich down instead of a rope. So she's moved. Her heart's moved. She doesn't stroll off. She stays herself and she reaches in. She's right at the edge of the other person's experience, and never for one moment is she one with it. The rope is empathy. The drowning's fake. And once you can see the difference, the sin they keep warning you about turns out to be the sin that empathy never actually commits. That woman with the rope, the one who reaches in without falling in, it is Edith Stein. She is the one who showed us how that's even possible. In 1916, in Freiburg, studying under Husserl, she wrote her dissertation on this exact question. When I grasp that you're in pain, what kind of mental act is that? It's called phenomenology, the study of it. And her answer is that empathy is its own kind of act, a sui generis act, not reducible to perception or to memory or imagination or guesswork. And at the heart of her argument is this one little paradox. I really do receive your experience, and yet it arrives as marked the whole way through as not mine. She breaks this into a few moments. First, your grief surfaces in your face, your posture, your voice. I follow it. I move along its contours, and then it stands there in front of me as your experience belonging to you. The middle step is the one everyone mistakes for fusion, and Stein is careful there. To follow your experience, she says, is to be at the foreign eye. But being at is not being one with. I stay alongside you, never, in her words, one with you. So all those vices the critics are afraid of, they actually belong to fusion, not to empathy. Empathy keeps the boundary. It's actually the act that honors the boundary, because your grief reaches me precisely as yours. It leads me. It never becomes mine. And I can't leave your story without telling you how it ends. The woman who built her entire philosophy on the irreducible reality of the other person was herself murdered at Auschwitz in 1942. That's this phenomenology. This is an argument she made with her life. And I couldn't make it in words if I tried. The irony is palpable. If Stein handles the first sphere, the contagion one, Levinas handles or Levinas, whichever way you want to say it, handles the second. And that's the worry about will, compassion overtaking the will. For Levinas, the face of another person is not an object you look at. It speaks to you. And I'm going to quote him here. The way in which the other person presents himself exceeds the idea of the other in me, he writes. We here name the face, unquote. And the first thing that face says before you've decided anything at all is a claim on you, a responsibility, he says. That responsibility comes before freedom. Ethics is first philosophy. It's not something we tack on. And see what that does to fear. That feeling before thinking dethrones the will thing. Levinas turns it over. The perception of the other person isn't the enemy of choosing well, but the actual condition of it. A will that screens that empathetic perception out is not clear. It's like choosing in the dark with no idea who or what your choices are landing on. I digress here, but an honest digression nonetheless. Levinas was a Jewish thinker. He was deeply wary of every grand system, and he would not co-sign the Christian conclusion I'm heading toward. But that's exactly why his testimony on this one point is worth so much. He has no reason to be helping me. Perhaps the strongest objection of all doesn't come from theology. It comes from a psychologist, Paul Bloom. He says that empathy is a spotlight. It is narrow and numerate, which, in his words, means it can't do the math. And what my kids say, the math isn't mathing, he thinks. It lights up one face right in front of you and leaves thousands you can't see in total darkness. His fix is what he calls rational compassion, a cooler concern that can actually count heads around you. And he's not wrong that empathy can be partial and that partiality can be unjust. But Levinas already answered this for us decades earlier. He called it la tiers, the third party. You're never really alone with just one other person. There's always the third, the one beyond the face, the one I can't see. And the third makes a demand of me it compares, it measures, it to do justice. We live in a world where our actions can be seen by thousands of people, and Levinas came to this conclusion before the social media hype. Ordered empathy is not trapped in the spotlight at all. The very same perception that registers the sufferer right in front of me reaches through that third party, that la tiers, towards the sufferer I will never meet. And notice the anti-empathy crowd borrows Bloom's diagnosis, but quietly drops his cure. Because the real cure was never less perception. It was perception with justice built into it. Two more witnesses quickly, because they give all of this the order and its shape. Augustine gives the order. Virtue, he says in The City of God, isn't about how much you love. It's about loving the right things in the right way. He calls that ordo amoris, or rightly ordered love. So that whole anxious question, how much feeling is too much, was the wrong question from the very beginning. A gushing, self-indulgent empathy isn't disordered because your dial's turned up too high. It's disordered because it loves the wrong thing. Usually it's its own tenderness or some flattering picture of itself reflected back in the sufferer. Ordered empathy loves the neighbor as the neighbor actually is, under God and for the neighbor's own good. Its measure isn't a thermostat, it's a destination. Bonhoeffer gives us the shape. His word, Stellvertretung, which means standing in someone else's place while staying completely yourself. That is the opposite of fusion. If you dissolved into the person you were standing in for, you wouldn't be representing them anymore. You'd just be a copy of them. And there's a template for the right way to do this. Not just being a copy, but representing fairly and allowing their grief to be their grief. It's the opposite of fusion. It's called kenosis, the kenosis of Christ in Philippians 2. He emptied himself, ekenosin, and took the form of a servant. The God on high came down and made himself flesh. From the cosmological atmosphere, from the place of glory, he chose this. The incarnation itself is the ultimate act of empathy, the divine one, the example that we should follow. But, and this is the whole thing, it was an emptying of status, not of self. The one who takes the form of the servant is still the one who was in the form of God. He came all the way near without ever ceasing to be himself, which at the deepest possible level is the woman throwing the rope. This slide sets our four witnesses side by side, and they're all describing the single act. While Stein gives us the other, received but never possessed, Levinas gives us the claim that lands before we deliberate and then stretches it out to everyone. Augustine gives us love rightly ordered, and Bonhoeffer gives us the cruciform shape. You carry the other, you don't absorb them. Four witnesses, one act, and not one of them is describing the thing that critics are afraid of. Now let's go back and untie the knot that we started with. What is the image of God? The oldest philosophical answer was a faculty. Usually they put it in reason. in the act of reason. But Genesis points us somewhere else entirely, I think. See, in the ancient Near East, the Selem, the image of the king, was a statue he'd set up in some far off province that he had conquered to stand in for the king who was ruling probably from his capital city. And that statue made his rule present there. So that's the Selem. So to be made in God's image, Selem, is to be planted in the world as God's living representative. The image, as Middleton puts it, is an office before it is a possession. It's a job before it is a trait. And the God this office represents isn't some solitary monarch. He is relationship, a communion, a life, I can never say this word, koinonia, Father, Son, and Spirit endlessly pouring themselves out to one another and to us. That's the relational reading you find in Barth and Grentz and Ziziolas. To be a person is to be for others. Bearing the image means being made for the other, perceiving the other, moving toward the other, which means empathy is not sitting next to the image as some optional extra. Empathy is the image doing its job. It's the office discharged. Now, I want to stop and answer a hard question because no philosophical pondering is worth its weight if it doesn't answer objections. And this is real and it deserves an answer. If empathy belongs to the image of God, then what about people who cannot empathize? The person with the profound impairment, or maybe even some of these guys teaching the anti-empathy rhetoric, or someone whose capacity for empathy is simply broken. Has my theory just demoted them? And what about those I myself find it difficult to empathize with? Am I a failure of the image? No. And this is exactly the point where thinking of the image as an office can rescue us. Because thinking of it as a skill would have made us complete failures, would have sunk it. Empathy is not a test you have to pass to qualify as an image bearer. If it were, I'd just be handing the critics their own anthropology back in nicer clothes. See, the image is the office. Empathy is the office being exercised. And losing the capacity cancels the image about as much as when an ambassador falls asleep, he ceases to be an ambassador, or the president falls asleep and he ceases to be the president. See, dignity lives in the calling, not in the performance. Where does this whole office finally come true? I know. It's in Christ. And he is the one we are to emulate, the truest image. If I want to be like someone, it's like Jesus. The image of the invisible God, Paul says, the firstborn of all creation. But there's an entire sentence here and it's beautiful, so I'm going to read the whole thing. He has rescued us from the power of the darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, all things have been created through him and for him. Jesus is the one true icon. The image that cracked in us is being put back together in him, and it's being restored in exactly the shape we've been tracing this whole time. Perceiving the other and moving towards the other all the way down into our suffering. I want to end where Christian anthropology has to end, not with definition, but with a face, like Levinas tells us. The shortest verse in the English Bible, I'm saying that because I was corrected, not necessarily in Greek is it the shortest. In English, it's 2 words. Jesus wept. I think we have to sit in the discomfort of that verse, the strangeness of that. He's standing at the grave of his friend Lazarus, and he knows better than anyone else in the crowd that the grave is about to lose. Any moment now, he's going to raise his voice and call a dead man back to life, back into the daylight after being dead for 4 days. He has the power to end the grief with a single word. He does not need to cry because the tears will not change the outcome by anything at all. And he weeps anyway. What does that mean? that the one who holds galaxies together, the one through whom, as Paul has just told us, all things were made, stands in the mud outside of a tomb. His eyes fill and he grieves alongside two women whose brother is dead. He could have stayed above it. Omnipotence has every excuse to stay above it. Instead, God comes all the way down into the pit of human sorrow and he sits in it and he weeps. And he never stops being God while he does it. The tears are wept in the human nature he took on. And yet, by the ancient rule of the church called communicatio idiomatum, they belong to the one person of the Son. So this is not a man weeping while God watches from somewhere that is distant and safe. This is God in the flesh weeping. Not his eyes welling up, not one tear trickling down his face. A guttural grief manifest. He has climbed all the way down in the hole with us and he has kept his own footing. He's the one who weeps with us and the one who commands the grave, and he is both at once. That is empathy. That and nothing the critics describe. Not a fusion because he never ceases to be himself. Not a cold distance because he will not hover above our grief. He comes near, all the way near into our suffering and stays himself. And his nearness turns out to be the very same thing that raises the dead. So the next time someone tells you that empathy is weakness, take them to that base. Those tears are not his strength failing him. Those tears are his strength. At last, showing you what it has looked like from the very beginning. This is the thing that parts of the church are now being asked to call a sin. I want to leave you with the opposite. That it is the cruciform virtue the image has been asking us from the very first page of the Bible. The capacity they want struck from the Christian vocabulary is the very capacity God puts on display when he stands in the mud and weeps for a friend he's about to raise from the dead. The disparaged virtue turns out not to be just empathy, but the disowned image. And to rehabilitate it will be nothing less than the church turning back to look at its own face and finding, when it does, that the church's face should be wet with tears.